Afternoon, guys, and welcome back. And hopefully, we actually going to get quite a bit of stuff actually done today. One of the things we're going to be looking at today with regards to Python is something called built-in functions. Now, built-in functions are basically segments of code, and later on, you will learn how to write your own functions. But basically, built-in functions, they come with Python. They make your life very easy, and they are actually created to do certain common tasks. So if you're looking at that screen right now, the first function we're actually going to be looking at is the max function. Now, the max function, very simple. It's short for maximum. And if you look at this, you've got max n1, comma n2, comma n3. These represent different numbers. And this function will actually determine which one of those values is the largest, and it will return that. Now, important to note, any values or variables that appear within brackets in a function are called arguments, right? So if you look at this here, right? Example, I have a variable called large. Large is assigned, remember I said this yesterday, equals reads as is assigned. So large is assigned max 45, comma 6. Sorry, sorry about that, comma 98, comma 2, comma 55. Now, which one of these values is the largest? And the largest is 98. So the value 98 will come into large. So max will return 98. It will go into large. And if we have to print the variable large, remember, it's the data that is stored in large that will be displayed. It would output 98. So if you actually looking at an example, all right? So let's look at this. We've got a question, read in two integer values and determine an output the larger of the two values. Now, remember, we have three parts to any program. We have input, we have output, and we have, sorry, and in between, we have our processing. So it's important to identify each part here. So input, remember I told you yesterday, when you see a phrase read in, it actually means input. So how many values are we going to input? Two integer values. So I'm going to need two variables. So let's call them num1 . Num1 is assigned, remember, to allow the user to enter data, we actually use the input command back inside the brackets, and we're going to put a user-friendly message basically telling the user what we want them to do, what action they should actually carry out. So we are going to say, enter the first value. So the user will enter the first value and it will get stored in num1. Now we need to input our second value, and that is basically num2 is our variable, is assigned input and our user-friendly message, enter the second value. Now, recall I said this yesterday, that the input command, the input function, inputs data as strings. So right now, num1 is a string and num2 is a string. I want to actually carry out a mathematical operation with regards to this. So I need to convert num1 and num2 into integers. How do I do that? It's pretty straightforward. Remember from yesterday. So I'm going to say num1 is assigned. Now, remember at the moment, at this point here, num1 is a string. Num2 is a string. When I do the following, or when the following instruction is carried out, what happens? It will take num1, the string, it will convert it into an integer, and it will store it in num1. So from that point on, num1 is now an integer. And we do the same thing for num2. Num2 is assigned int num2. So right now, we've got num1 and num2 being integers. Now, looking back at this here, we are going to use our max function. So I'm going to have a variable called large is assigned max, and I want to find the maximum value of which two variables, num1 and num2. So I'm going to go num1 comma num2, right? So that is our processing. And obviously I need to determine, I have to output the larger value. So we use our print command, and we are going to print large. So remember, what does max do? We are sending num1 and num2 to max. Max will determine which one is the largest value, and it will bring it back and it'll store it in large. So when we display large, the value that is stored in large will be displayed. So if we run this, okay, so just give me a moment. I'll make this a little bit more tidier. Right, so let's go run that. Okay, first value, I'm going to enter 3, second value 7. Now, looking at that, guys, 7 is the larger value, so 7 should be displayed. So when we press enter, it displays 7. So if I run this again, don't worry about that. If I run this again, and if I go and enter 23 and 12, it should output 23. And you'll see that is so. But we want this output statement to be a little bit more user-friendly. So I want to go and put in a statement here. The larger value is, and if I run this now, am I going to get an error? Am I going to get an error? And yes, I am going to get an error, because if you remember from yesterday, okay, I'm going to go into 23 and 12, and it's going to give me an error, right? You'll notice that I have an error. The error is taking place in the print statement. And remember, I told you concatenate means to join, and you can only join a string to a string. You cannot join an integer to a string. So if you're looking at this, right, I'm just going to close that. If you're looking at this, large is an integer. We need to make it a string. Now, remember, num at this point was a string. We cast it into an integer, and here we can cast large into an integer. So what happens now? Large will become a string. The larger value is, that's also a string, and it can join that. So if we run this, okay, 23, 12, and the larger value is 23, and that is a lot more user friendly. Now, coming back here, we have a max function that determines the largest value. Okay, now let's go and look at our next function. Our next function obviously is the opposite of max, and this is called min. It works exactly the same way as max, but it determines and returns the smallest value that we send to it. So we're sending n1, n2, and n3, and it min will determine which one is the smallest value, and it will return that value back. So if you look at this example, smallest is assigned min. We got 45, 6, 98, 2, and 55. The smallest value is 2. 2 will come in and get stored in smallest. And when we say print smallest, it's going to output 2. So we can actually do this in the same program. So I'm going to come over here and declare variable small is assigned min, and I'm going to send the same num1 comma num2 to the min function, and it will determine the smallest value. Once again, I need a print statement now to display the smaller value. So the smaller value is, and remember, small at this point is an integer. I can only join a string to a string. So I typecast small into a string. So we actually expanded this program now. So what do we have? We actually have the program determining the largest and the smallest. So if we run this, okay, let's go into 78 and 32 and enter. The larger value is 72 and the smaller value is 78, sorry, and the smaller value is 32. So hope you guys follow and understand how that actually works, right? So that's basically your smaller and larger value. Now, coming back here, we have another function. Rarely do we actually use it, but basically it's called the absolute value function. And all it simply does is Whether you send a positive number to it or a negative number, it will always return a positive value. So, just coming back to this very quickly, I'm just going to change this over here. Right? We'll just take that question out from there. Right. Once again, I need a variable. I'm going to input, ask the user to enter a value, right? So that is my input. Now remember, I have to input reads your data, all data, as an int, as a string. I need to make num an integer, so num is assigned int of num. So at that point, num now becomes an integer. Okay, then my processing, and basically I'm going to have a variable called answer is assigned abs and num, and my output is simply going to be print the absolute value of, well, the absolute value is, and once again, answer, the variable answer is an integer, so I need to make it into a string. Okay, so let's run this and check this out. Okay, so if I'm going to enter the number 80, it will display 80. If I'm going to enter the value minus 98, it's going to output 98. So basically what happens is, whether we send a positive number or a negative number to ABS, it will always return a positive value, right? So that is important, and you need to remember that. Okay, now, we did this yesterday. So if you look at this over here, right, we have the pow. I know it sounds like a comic book thing, you know, when a superhero punches somebody, you see the word pow there, right? So pow is basically short for power, and it basically raises a to the power b. So this function calculates and returns a raised to the power b. There you go. So if I looked at an example and if I said answer is assigned pow 3 comma 5, it will raise 3 to the power 5. In other words, it's going to be 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. It's going to multiply 3 by itself 5 times, and there is our output. So if we look at a new program, and let's just save this very quickly as power. Oh no, there is a power there. Let me just check. Where's the power? Here we go. Read into integer values and determine an output, the first value raised to the power of the second value. Now, before we actually look at that, let's go and look at a simple example with numbers, with actual values. So answer is assigned pow, and if we said 2 comma 8, or 2 comma 7, I think that's 128, right? Yeah. and I'm going to print this. Print, right? And I'm just going to type in answer. If answer is on its own, it would work. If I put a string, then I had to typecast. And it output 128. Can you see that? So that is 2 to the power 7. If you guys use your calculators and work that out, you would get that. But we don't want to. Now remember, every single time we run this program, it's going to give us 128. We don't want that. We actually want the user to enter any two values, and the user can decide what to calculate. So this is a useful program, especially, when you're doing maths and things like that over there. So let's go and look at it now. I need to input two values. So I'm going to go with, okay, I'm going to use A. I know it's not very meaningful, but it's from the example previously. A is assigned input, enter first value, and B, oh, sorry, that's a different programming language syntax, input, enter second value. All right, so we've got A and we've got B. Now remember, A and B are strings at the moment because input always enters strings, right? So what do we do now? We typecast, and we're going to go with A is assigned int A, B is assigned int B. So there are my two numbers now. Then we're looking at processing, and here's our processing, guys. This is our processing. At the moment, it's outputting 2 to the power 7. It's calculating 2 to the power 7, but I actually want to work out A to the power B. And where do A and B actually get their values? They get it from the user. So it becomes a little bit more of a general program, because then you can enter any two values each time you run it, and it would work it out, no matter how large those values are. So it's going to be A comma B. And I'm going to make this a little bit more user friendly, right? So we're going to say the answer is, and answer is an integer, so we have to typecast it. See that? Okay, so if you look at this, we're entering our first value and second value as strings, right? So these two values over here at this point are strings. When these two statements are executed, they become integers. Then obviously answer is assigned the power of A raised to the power B, and we're displaying the answer. So let's go and see. We put 2 and 7 initially, and it gave us 128. So let's enter 2 and 7 and see. Okay, it's 128. So we go back, we run it again, and we could go with 4 and 5. And the answer will be 1024. So 4 to the power 5. Right, and let's run it one more time. Okay, and just show you. That's not going to work. Right. Let's assume we say 3 to the power 8. And the answer is 6561. Okay, so that is how we actually use the power function. Okay, moving on. Now, this is one of the most useful functions you could actually use. There's two ways of actually using the round function, right? Now, if you look at here, you have round num, or you could have round num comma p. Now, what do those things actually mean, right? Basically, what it means is this. If you're looking at the first example, it'll round it off to the nearest whole number. In the second example, the p, you rounding off num, and the p represents how many decimal places do you want to round it off to. So if you look at this, right, I've got over here, answer is assigned round of 23.2524532. If we round this off to 2 decimal place, this 4 will become a 5 because this number is 5 or more. Notice the answer, 2 decimal places, 23,25. Same value, answer is assigned round, 23.2453, and the nearest whole number is 23. So if you are looking at that, okay, let's just save this. Okay, and let's go and look at, I'm just going to put a comment here. Okay, the round function. So let's look at this. We would actually ask the user to enter a number. Now I'm going to show you something a little bit different. So if you get confused, please ask a question, right? So firstly, I've got num is assigned input, enter a value. Now just remember, I'm going to be entering a decimal value, which is actually a real value. It's not an int anymore. And in Python, we use the word float to refer to real values. So num is assigned input, enter value, and that is going to be a string. Just remember that, right? So at that point, num is a string. Okay. Then I need to typecast. And I'm going to go with num is assigned. Now remember, it's a real value. And in Python, the word for real is float. So we typecast it as a float, as a real value. And at that point, num becomes a decimal value, decimal float, similar kind of thing. And then we have our processing. And with regards to processing, we need to round it off. Okay, we're going to have two rounding off values, right? So I'm just going to have ans1 is assigned round, and I'm just going to put in num. Now that has only one argument, so it's going to round it off to the nearest whole number. Then if we look at ans2, And I'm going to use two arguments here. I'm going to say num comma 3. Now, what does that mean, guys? It means that in this statement, we're going to round off number to 3 decimal places. All right? So at this point, it rounds off to nearest whole number. And at this point, it's going to round off to 3 decimal places. And lastly, we come to our output. Okay. And we going to use our print command, and we're going to say to nearest whole number. And remember now, guys, listen. We have to now answer 1 and answer 2 are float. We can only display them like this if we cast them back into string. And we're going to go print for our second rounding off, and we're going to say to 3 decimal places. And once again, sorry, if we're going to convert it to a string, and that's ans 2. So we're entering a value here. It's a string. We are going to cast it into a float. It becomes a decimal value, a float value. Let me just put that here. Float. At this point, it's going to round it off to the nearest whole number. And at this point, it's going to round it off to 3 decimal places. This will output the first rounded off to nearest whole number. And the second one will round it off to 3 decimal places. So let's go run it. Okay, so let's think of a number. We're going to go with 45.67153. Now, to the nearest whole number, if you look at this point here, guys, this is 5 or more, so this should become 46. And to 3 decimal places, 1, 2, 3, we look at the 4th value. Because it is 5 or more, the 1 must become a 2. Let's see if that works. Can you see that, guys? So 45.67, nearest whole number becomes 46. And 671 becomes 672 as long as this value is 5 or more. Now, if that value was less than 5, then it would just be 671. Let's try something else. Okay, so let's go with 23.12, right, 3, 4. Okay, nearest whole number, immediately after the decimal point, it's 1, it's less than 5, so it's going to remain 23. And 3 decimal places, 1, 2, 3. Look at the 4th value, it's less than 5, so it will just remain as 1, 2, 3. And there you go. 23.1234 becomes 23. And to 3 decimal places, it will remain 0.123 because this value is less than 5. Right. Okay. Moving on. There are other built-in functions, people, but in order to use them, at the beginning of the code, you need to tell Python you actually want to use them. So basically, there's another program written, and that program is called math. If you look at the screen, and we are basically going to tell Python, hey, listen, there are functions inside this program math. We want access to them. And to gain access to them at the beginning of your program, right at the top, first line, you're going to say import math. That means all the functions that exist in the math program, you will have access to it, right? Now, your math program, I said program, but technically it's called a class. Okay, so let's look at some of the functions from the math class. This is a very interesting function, guys. Math, and we actually use the functions from the math class with the word math dot. There are quite a few functions. We're just going to learn the basics. So if you look at this, we've got math.ceil, and we are sending this value. This value is a float value, guys, right? This value is a float value. Now, what does ceil actually mean? It's short for ceiling, and all of us should know this. If you in a room, the ceiling is the top. So if you look at this question here, I've got, or this example, I've got answer is assigned math.ceil 23.2. No matter what, this is unlike round now. If I was rounding this, because 2 is less than 5, it'll make it 23. But the mere fact that this is a non-zero value, it could be 1, 2, 3, whatever value, ceil, it'll take 23 and push it to the next whole number, which is 24. Okay? If you look at the next example, 23.5, it'll still move that to 24. So irrespective of what your decimal value is, it will move it to the next whole number. And that's your ceiling function. Now, guys, what's the opposite of ceiling? The opposite of ceiling is floor. So if you look at this here, floor is the opposite of ceiling. So it doesn't make a difference what the decimal point is, it'll drop it down to this number. So if you look at, again, 23.2, it'll drop it down to 23. 23.5, if we had to round this, it would become 24. But because we're using the floor, it'll drop it to 23. Okay, so let's go save this, and we'll call it floor ceil. All right, now I need to use floor and ceil. They belong to the math class. So the first line in my code is going to be import math. Okay, then we are going to ask the user to enter a number. Now, I did tell you in the previous program, I'm going to show you something a little different, and I'm going to show it to you here. So I'm going to go with num is assigned input, enter a decimal value. Okay, so at this point, what is it? Num is a string because input always only reads in string. Now, before I can do anything mathematical with num, what do I need to do? I need to typecast it. And it needs to be a decimal. or real value, and in Python it's called a float. So we typecast it as float num. Okay, so we're done with that. Then we actually have our processing. All right, so let's go there. Right, so with regards to our processing, what exactly we're going to do, we are going to we are going to do the following. We're going to work out the floor and the ceiling. Well, we'll work out the ceiling first, right? So obviously I need a variable. So I'm going to call it f seal. I can't use the word seal because it's a reserved word. So we'll call it f seal is assigned. Now, I want you to look at this here. Whenever we have a reserved word, it's in purple. Seal is not in purple. Seal belongs to the math class. I'm going to show you something pretty amazing. If you go and type in math and you press dot, it gives you a list of all the stuff that's there. We don't actually use everything. We use some of them. Can you see that, guys? I'm just going to go click on seal. And I want to find the ceiling value, the next whole number of num. And then I'm going to go with f floor. Once again, math dot type f l, there's floor, press enter, it selects it for you, right? And we're doing that there. And then we have our output. So with regards to our output, right, we want to print, we want to print the ceiling value is, and once again, f seal is a float value, right? Oh, let's try this. Because we're using seal and floor, it's making it a whole number. So in other words, f seal should be int, right? So we're just going to go with string f seal, and we're going to go with print the floor value is, and once again str, and we're going to go with f floor. Right, I'm going to come back to this just now to show you how we can combine these two things into one. But let's go run this and check it out. Okay. So if I enter 23.9, if I had to round this off, it'll become 24, right? And I want you to see this. Obviously, the ceiling value will push it to 24. But I will look at the floor value. It just ignored that and it brought it down to this whole number, right? So in other words, how does the ceiling work? The ceiling is very simple. What it actually does is it removes this part and it just adds one to it, right? And the floor, it just removes that part and gives you that answer. And I'll actually show you, there's another function that's coming up just now where we could actually use that function to do exactly this, right? So let's go run it again and put in a different value. If I went and put 91.1. Now, because this is a non-zero value, it's going to move it to 92. And obviously the floor is going to drop it back down to 91. Can you see that, guys? Okay. So that is your floor and your ceiling. Now, coming back to this, it's good programming if you have as little code as possible. So what we're basically saying is this: we can take, excuse me, we can take this statement and the statement and combine it. And how do we combine it? It's very, very simple. Remember, what does input do? It reads in anything as a string. Because we're entering a number, a decimal value, can you see the typecast that's taking place here? Check this out. I'm going to go and type float in front there, go to the end and close bracket. So this I'm inputting and typecasting in one line. So if you look at this, what's happening? The user is going to enter a decimal value, input will read it in as a string, float will convert it to a decimal real value, and num will obviously store it as a number immediately. So if I go and run this again, and if I go and enter 54.3, oh, not comma, 0.3, there we go. 55, 54, no errors because we input the value and we cast it immediately. So I just want to go back to this question very, very quickly, right? Raising one number to the other. Can you see this input here? We're going to go with and. I'm just showing you how the typecast would actually work. Okay, so I don't want this now. What am I going to do? I'm going to go and type int, open bracket, go to the end, close bracket. Once again here, int, open bracket, go to the end, close bracket. So it's going to enter the value as a string. Int will make it an integer and a will be a number. Same here. you, you input the second value, int will convert it to a number, and it works. So if we run this now, right? If I went to enter 2 to the power 8, 256, and it works. No problems. So the important thing is this, that we can actually combine, we can actually typecast and input in one line. It actually saves time. And like I said, the shorter the program, the easier it is. All right. Let's move on. Right, we looked at floor, we looked at seal. Now here we go. Now remember, round rounds off to the nearest whole number. The trunk is short for truncate, and truncate means to cut off. So irrespective of what your decimal value is, it just chops it off. Now the trunk is actually similar to the floor. It's similar to the floor, right? So basically, if you're looking at something like this, okay, if you're looking at something like this, we just save this, We'll call it truncate. And like I said, import math. Then we are going to input and typecast, and let's go. Num is assigned. Now, first I put my cast. It's going to be a float. So I'm going to go with float, open, close. Like I told you yesterday, open, close. Don't just open and type because you might forget a bracket. And sometimes we have a lot of brackets in a line. It becomes confusing. Then inside, I'm going to allow the user to enter a value. Enter a decimal value. So in this statement, what's happening? The user is going to enter a decimal value as a string. Float will convert it into a real number and store it in num. Then we have our processing, and we're using trunk, remember that, right? So I'm going to go with answer is assigned. Now once again, math dot tr, there's trunk there, press enter, or you can type it out, and we're going to truncate num. Do you follow? Right? And then we can output. So once again, we got print the truncated value is, and remember, trunk will return an integer. So it's an integer. If I want to join it to a string, I gotta cast it into a string. So I'll cast answer into a string, and there we go. So just remember with trunk, irrespective of what the decimal value is, it just chops it off. It only gives you the whole number part. So if I said 56.8, if I rounded that off, it would become 57. But trunk chops off the point part. The decimal part is just thrown away. It's discarded. So, right now I put 0.8 over there. If I go and enter 45.1, similarly, it drops off. So basically, trunk and flow are very, very similar, right? They work the same way. Okay. This is a very, very interesting function because what I am going to do is this, guys, and I actually gave you guys my email address. Only one of you emailed me yesterday. I'm going to give it to you again. Email me, and I'm going to give you a link to some questions which you can try out yourself. So if you have any issues, you could actually email me your solutions and I could look at it and tell you where you went wrong, right? So square root, it will return either an integer or a float, right? But even if it's an integer, like look at this here, the square root of 1225, once again, math.square root is finding the square root of a number and it will give it to you as a float value. If I said the square root of 30, if I said the square root of 30, right, then we will get an answer of 5.4. Now, what you guys need to understand is this over here. Well, time's almost up, so we're going to stop there. And we're going to talk about the competition. Basically, we're looking for teams of 1 to 5 learners. We are looking at basically coming up with a little project that deals with a real world problem, and uh, you need to uh, basically come up with a solution to that problem. I've been thinking about this, and basically, the question with regards to the competition is choose a topic that actually deals with your community. They have an issue, and how you would actually come up with uh, a solution, a computer program that will assist them with that. So, what I want you guys, today is Wednesday, and what I want all of you guys to do is think about some kind of program that we could write. I have some ideas, but obviously this is your competition, right? And yes, there are some amazing prizes to be won. Basically, the winning team, each person actually gets a laptop and micro bits, right? Just give me a moment. Right. So basically, microbits are basically hardware, right? That's basically used, you know, you can actually program it, etc. So your first prize, you get a laptop and you get a microbits. For your second prize, you actually get a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino. They're also basically dealing, well, that's the next step in actually programming and controlling hardware with software. And your third prize, and that's basically each person in that team would actually get a Raspberry Pi 5. So what we need to do is this over here. Everything that we've done so far right now, you can actually use it to do something completely functional, right? But what I was considering was picking a topic from the community and actually coming up with a program to actually help with that. It is a tough task because most of you guys are new and you've just started. So I want you to consider something like this: writing a program, coming up with a program. Now, remember, if there's a team of five, basically we're going to take that one program and divide it into five parts, and each of you, each member of the team would actually be working on a separate part, and then obviously we need to put it together, and it has to work all together in one homogeneous do one homogeneous function. So think about this, guys. Here's my email address, and what, no, that's not the one we're going to be using. Okay, so please email me your ideas, your thoughts, and also email me so I can actually give you the questions that you could actually work uh, with regards to practice. Think about some kind of program that we could come up with that could be very useful, either to the learners at your school, because one of the things we were considering, well, I was considering was children do physics, children do science, chemistry, mathematics, etc. We could actually come up with a multifunction program that would assist them with actually determining whether whatever they're doing is correct. So, for example, they can enter an equation and it could factorize it for them, it could do lots of stuff for them mathematically. You're looking at, with regards to natural science and physics and maths, you're looking at speed and distance and time and acceleration. I mean, they're amazing ideas. And the best part is later on, we can actually take that, make it into an app, and people can actually use it on their phone, download it on their phone and use it there. So please, there's my email address on the screen. Write it down, email me, and let's go from there. I want to thank all of you for your attendance today. Please, I asked you to, well, you should have downloaded Python by now. Watch that video. It's on the Africa Teen Geeks YouTube channel. It's coding grade 8. It's lesson 1, Coding Grade 8, Lesson 1. The video is in there telling you how to download Python, how to install it. So please download, install, try. Please email me today so that I can send you a link to these questions that you can practice with. Thank you so much, guys, and have a good afternoon. Take care, and we'll meet tomorrow at 2. Thank you. Goodbye.